So I am going to show you guys how I do my artistic dog paintings. First, I'm going to take this Sharpie. You can take whatever black marker you have. I just so happen to use a Sharpie. Make sure that it's one that won't smudge and that basically kind of dries quickly. You want to outline the sketch you already have. I already have the basic sketch of the dog on the canvas. As you can see, like my lines, they're not, super nice and pretty, and you can see little jagged marks. It's not going to matter after we put the coats over. This is just so you know basically where to drop down your base color of paint. But yeah, this is just so you can get the basic shape of the dog. You guys also probably can't see, but I do have my laptop behind the canvas. I am looking back and forth to the reference photo to see the little details that I want to add and keep. Now I'm going to take this acrylic gesso. It's just a white gesso that I bought, and I have it in a big tub because I use it with every single one of my paintings. I first grab a relatively large paintbrush. I could have used something a lot bigger, but it's just what I had on hand. And I'm going to take the paintbrush, dip it into the gesso, and then cover the whole canvas in gesso. This is going to help because the canvas that I'm using does have a bit of texture on the canvas part. And the gesso, what it does is it covers those little bumps and textures, and it will make it a lot easier for the second layer of paint to go on. That way it goes on more smoothly and it makes it a lot easier. As you can see, the Sharpie that we used before is really helping the gesso still, the Sharpie is helping the lines still show through the gesso. That way, when we're laying down our paint, you can still see like the dimensions of the dog and where you're supposed to be painting. But it does lighten it up a bit, which is why I suggested you go in with the Sharpie after the basic sketch with the pencil. If we had gone with pencil only, then you would probably not be able to see your lines at all through the gesso. And I also just use a pretty thin coat of gesso. You can make it a little thicker. You're just gonna have to wait for it to dry. So I just put on one coat, which is pretty much all I feel I need. Now that the gesso is dry, I'm going to go ahead and take my little palette that I use to mix my paints in. And I'm going to grab a base color. So first, I always like to work with the lights. So here I am taking like a pale yellow, and I'm just pouring a little bit onto the palette. You can always pour more, and I hate to waste, so I try not to make a lot of paint at once. And I just go ahead and pick a small brush to start off. And I look at the dog and I figure out what the lightest points of the dog are, and I start painting it with yellow. Sometimes I try to follow the realistic colors of the dog and match them up with other colors that I want to use. But for the most part, my high points of the dog and parts that would be highlighted like on a face or on fur or anything, I usually make it like a yellow or a very white sort of blue color. For this one, we are doing yellow. And now I'm going to pick a bright neon orange, and I am going to fill in the even darker parts of the dog, and so on. You'll see a general trend with the paints that I use. The darker the paint, the darker the fur is on the dog. But yeah, so that's how I do the whole painting. This paint was a lot more transparent than I thought it would be, so I do end up having to go over some of these paints, you know, once or twice and build up a couple layers, but it's not all the time that you get good paints that are opaque on the first try, especially the ones that I'm using right now. These paints were only 50 cents for each little bottle, so you know, I'm fine with going over it. Yeah, as you see, like, I'm not being super exact about where I'm putting things. I am being decisive about wanting to see what should be of a deeper color and what should be of a lighter color, but my strokes and everything, they're not following exact points, and I don't really have reference lines as to where I want to stop the highlight and to start the deeper values. They all kind of just mix into each other, and it's supposed to be more of a rough looking painting. It is an artistic painting. It's not supposed to look realistic whatsoever, so you don't need to worry about, you know, can you see those brush strokes and can you see that you're going from one direction to the other. Like, it's supposed to look a little, you know, a little messy, a little rough. It's it looks more artsy that way. At least that's what it looks like to me. So I'm just kind of estimating where I put all the paints, and I'm letting them kind of bleed one into another, and it looks pretty messy right now, but it looks a lot better once you start the outlining process. I'm using the same paintbrush for every single color. I just go ahead and dip it into my cup with some water in it. I clean off the brush, and I've been using that same one. Now I'm going to go into the spots on the dog. The dog does have black or very dark gray spots, but I didn't want to use black on the painting because I know I'm going to outline in black. So I decided to choose brown to symbolize the darkest parts of the dog, which are, you know, the spots and the dark black parts on the coat. Now I'm going to take some of the gesso that we originally used to cover the canvas in the first place, and I'm going to go over certain parts that I decided I didn't want to be as dark as the black parts. And the gesso isn't so overpowering that it just completely turns everything white, but I do use it to lighten up a couple colors that I decided, you know, I didn't want as dark. So I do mix up a couple of like that orange, the yellow we used, some of the brown, and then mix it in with the gesso to make a lighter tan sort of color. Because I decided I did want it to be brown, but not really as dark as it was, so I do go over it. Then I decided to make a lighter version of that purple and that orange, and I go over all the purple and orange spots again, because as we saw in the beginning, one layer just was not enough for that paint. I did need to go over it a couple times. So that's just what I'm doing right here, is going over my second layer. Then I go ahead and clean my brush again, because I'm going to continue to keep on using that same brush. And I am going to start filling in the collar, because I haven't painted that so far. So I'm going to grab some of that red. It's kind of like a cranberry red, so it kind of has some pink in it. And I'm going to go over the collar area. I'm just going to go over the whole thing. I just put some black down, or some more red down. I'm going to do the ear. I did end up putting some black down, and we are going to use it right now to make a gray. So I take a little bit of the white, a little bit of the black, mix it up. And I'm going to try to get a sort of gray silver color. And that is going to help us with part of the tag on the collar and also the nose. And then I'm just going through and doing a final little layer on parts of the paint that I could still see through a little, just to make the colors as vibrant as possible. Again, you can see the edges are super messy. Now I'm going to take this super light blue. I just felt like the painting looked dark. It's definitely not what I'm used to painting. I'm used to painting in a lot lighter colors. So I just wanted to add some pop in there, some bright colors in there. And I decided I really liked this light blue. So I am going to add that to some of the dark blue parts. And I feel like I really did like that. It was a lot better of a style for me. It definitely took away from a lot of the darker colors, like the dark blue and the purple. Now I am adding a little stipple to it. The dog does look like it is dappled. It has some like some dappling on the back and down the legs a little where it looks like black with little gray or white specks inside. So I tried to emulate that in the painting a little by using the blue spots or the light blue spots just so it looks a little bit more like the dog. And this is the first dog that I've painted that had a design like that on the fur. Usually I've been doing dogs that are usually like of a solid fur. So and now it's time to do the background. So before I start outlining in black and everything, I decided it's best to paint the background because it's always easier to crisp up the lines and everything with black after everything is done with the base. So I get a bit of the gesso, mix it in with that green. Gesso is also a good way to make a paint more opaque. So I knew if I was going to use the same green that I was using for all the other colors, I was going to need a lot of layers. And let's be real, I did not want to paint a lot of layers on the background. So I mixed it in with the gesso. It became a little bit of a lighter green, but it also did not need as many layers. I probably only used one layer and just 2 layers on little spots here and there that needed it. I guess I also decided that I wanted to add a little bit of yellow into that green, so I did. I went over the part of the green that I had previously painted, and now I had enough to do the whole background, so that's what I'm going to do. What I'm doing right there is I'm also painting the sides of the canvas. So if you were to have the canvas hung up on a wall or something, you don't just see those white sides out of nowhere. Like the whole thing is going to be covered in green. And right now you can also see all of the brush strokes. I had left for a while and I left my gesso open, which gave the gesso a weird texture, and now when I was trying to paint with it, it was becoming really thick and kind of gooey, so it was leaving behind all of my brush strokes, and it was really weird at first, but I ended up being able to cover it with just a normal second layer, and then it looked fine. And I do the whole background with the same big brush. I don't feel the need to switch over to a smaller brush because the corner of the big brush gives me enough detail that I need. It is a bigger picture, so I don't need that much detail. But also, even if I go over a couple parts or mess up a little, it will get covered by the black outline, so I'm not worried. And now I'm just painting more around the outside of the canvas. I don't worry too much about the outside of the canvas being perfect because people don't really pay attention to that. So if you only do 1 layer on that, it's okay. I did end up doing 2 just because I hate to see that it's lighter than the main background. So okay, so this is the canvas background done with 1 layer. As you can see, there are parts of the background that are a lot darker than other parts, and some parts where you could still see through and you could see all the little brush strokes. So what I'm doing right now is I'm mixing up more of that green with the gesso, and I'm going to go over the background just to make sure that it's a nice even coat. And yes, the paint does look a little lighter than when I first put it down, but that's because once paint dries, it dries down a little. Depending on the brand, it dries down a little lighter or a little darker than what you put it down. So yes, I think I did mix it a little bit lighter than what I did before, but it will end up drying down to be all the same green color. So now I'm just outlining around the dog once more to get those fine little details. Most of the canvas already is painted, so now you can see that there is a nicer layer around it. It's just the little parts around the dog that I need to fix up. And now I stand back to look at it, see if there's anything else that I want to paint over. Sometimes when you're standing too close to the painting, you can't see little things that you might want to fix. So I always stand back and look at it before I decide whether I'm done with the base painting. And I'm just going over the sides again. Now that I did that, I also want to make sure that I get the bottom part painted. So I flip the painting over and I hold it while I paint the bottom, because if I put the painting down on the easel, then you'd get paint all over at the bottom. So I'm just going to hold it, paint the bottom, and then once the bottom is painted, I see that the side is dry. So once the side has been dried, I put it down on its side. So right now it's lopsided. I put some more black down, and it's time to switch out my brush. Now I'm going to be using this small little round brush, and I'm going to start the detail paintings. I just touched the side to see whether the bottom was still wet, and it was. So I'm going to start doing some of the detail work now and outlining. I don't have anything I can lean my arm down against, so I am leaning it against the painting. I did make sure that the whole dog was dry before I did this. Then I decide that the bottom should be dry enough, so I flip it over. And now I just continue with my painting. I do all the outlining that I need to do. And now you can see why I wasn't so worried about the edges between the color and the background because the edges get covered with the outline anyways. So fast forward, more of the head is outlined, and now I'm just outlining the details inside of the face part so you can differentiate. At this point, you can't really see the Sharpie lines anymore because of all the paint that you had put down, but the paint that you put down did help you to know where to put down your black lines, because wherever you started a color and ended another could be where a line was. At this point, the only lines that stayed visible were the ones in the collar that were red, because that red was not very opaque. Now that I've got the whole outline of the dog basically almost done, I'm doing those little details of like the fur. I did details above the eyes also, where you could see that the brow of the dog would be. Some hair details under the chin, some of the fluff details on the side of the legs. To do the bottom parts of the paintings, I would usually bring my easel up, but then it would have gone out of camera view, so I decided to keep it where it was. Now, I zoomed you in a little so you can see me do the details on the eyes. The eyes right now were basically white, so it was looking a little weird. I decided to add the iris and the pupil and outline the rest of the eye. And yes, this is how the dog's eyes are in the photo. He's not looking directly at the camera. He does have an eye that kind of wanders a little. But we end up fixing it a little by making it look a little bit more forward at you with the white that we will add later. Then I want to add the accentuation of the muzzle. And now we're taking the white gesso again. And I'm adding the little white highlights, white details to wherever they may need them. That would be in like the pupils of the eye to add the shine. You can see I added some white in there. I needed to cut a little bit of my paintbrush off because one of the strands was coming off. So now I'm adding details to the eyes, the little shine in the pupil. And then you gotta have a shiny nose. So I added some shine to the nose. And the lips, you always add a little bit of highlight there, especially if they have like a wet nose, they might have like wet lips. And now I'm just adding some white to parts of the fur and to the tags because those are also made out of metal, so it should be shiny. And again, I know that the dog has some spotting on the fur, so I decided to add some of the little white spots as well. I know I didn't paint over the bone, so we are just using the white from the gesso, and I just wanted to clean up some of the spots where color had gotten onto it, so that's what I just did. Now I'm adding some of the cute little whiskers that the dog has. And I try to make them as thin as possible to the point where they're visible, but they're not taking over the face. And now this is the last detailing part of the whole painting. Is basically I'm going to add these black little I wouldn't even know what to call them, but black little lines that are kind of wavy, and they're following kind of closely to the dog. They're in no particular length, they're in no particular way that I'm, distance that I'm doing. It's just kind of, wavy little lines that I draw, and I usually do at least 3 rows of these. Sometimes I do more depending on the area, and some will be shorter, some will be longer, some will be, tiny and skinny, some will be a lot more fat. But I make sure to go around the whole dog. And I don't know why, I just feel like it looks more interesting with these, so I've started to do them all with that, and I think it looks fun. Definitely gives that artistic feel to it. Doing these sometimes can get difficult if you have to go over the paint multiple times. So if your paint starts to feel thick, you aren't going to get a nice, clean, crisp line. So what I do, as you can occasionally see, is I will dip my brush into the water, and then I will go ahead and dip my brush back into the paint, and it will make the paint a little bit more runny. You need to be careful to not get super runny paint because you don't want the paint running down the canvas, but you want it runny enough to where you can make a consistent line. And now I'm going through and putting all the little dots where the whiskers would be coming out from. And now the last touch is I'm going to put a sealer on. I couldn't find my varnish sealer, so I just put this sparkle sealer over, and it's still a clear sealer, and it goes over to protect the paint. And that's my finished painting. Let me know what you guys think.